It is time now for the Scramble podcast. Once again, alongside my podcast partner, Chris Flynn, who is in beautiful Quebec. I am Paul Hollingsworth in beautiful Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. And our guest today is TSN's Dave Naylor, who is the CFL football insider and Bills reporter for TSN. Dave, really good to see you and really grateful you took time to join us.
Glad to be here. Real pleasure to join you and Chris Flynn, who I got to meet at the Hall of Fame inductions in June. A fan from afar and now can call him a friend.
Well, I've been joking the whole time I've been hanging with him, Dave. Every time you hang with Chris Flynn, you get to meet some really interesting people. And Chris, by the way, I know you are a major football consumer, Chris, and Dave's one of your go-to guys when it comes to following the sport, both in the north and south of the border.
In the CFL, of course, I see all your segments, and this summer you were on the panel quite a bit too, like during the games, the halftime, and everything, which you did a great job. And of course, the NFL has been keeping you very busy there with the Bills, with DeMar, and of course, just how the team is doing. And I was going to ask you, like, do you live in Buffalo during the season or almost?
Rod Smith asked me the other day, he said, how many times have you crossed the border since the summer? I said, it's got to be over 30. Now, it actually works out very well. Where I live in Toronto is in Mississauga, in an area called Port Credit, that people may be familiar with. It's kind of the southwest corner of Toronto. So as all things geographic, when it comes to driving in Toronto, it's all about how much traffic you got to get through, not how far the distance is. And because I live on the outside, I don't have to cross Toronto to get to Buffalo. So I'm about an hour to the border and about another 30 minutes to Orchard Park, New York. So nice. On days when there's like no border issue at all, I could get there in about 90 minutes. So it's awesome. It's really for in terms of proximity where I could be living in Toronto.
Yeah. Do you attend the practices regularly and stuff?
Yeah, and that's one of the things, Chris, when we decided we were going to focus on the Buffalo Bills this fall and into the off season or into the postseason. One of the things I said to the TSN, my boss, I said, well, if we're going to do this, let's commit to it, right? Like, let's not say we're sort of doing it, and then the first time something comes up that bumps it, and like, no, we're going to be at the Bills every week, and we did that. I went to training camp in late July, and off and on through August, and then we're there every Wednesday, pretty much. I think Grey Cup week may be the only one I wasn't. So the neat thing about that is when you cover. And I haven't done a lot of beats in my career. I've done a lot of different things, but I haven't done, where I was just on one team. I've done it for Stanley Cup playoff runs, and I've done it for playoff runs in football, but I've never done it for an entire season. And it's interesting because you notice things about a team that you could only notice by sort of studying intensely every game they play, and knowing every transaction and every bit of roster management that they do to try to gain an edge. And so when it gets to this point in the season, everything you've sort of consumed and talked about and considered over the last 17, 18 weeks gives you, a pretty good grasp about this team and what they've got to do to get to the Super Bowl.
Yes. And what a year and what a season you've been covering.
A loud season. They have been the noise-making team. It's like every time there's a huge NFL story, it seems to, Von Miller's out. They got to move a game to Detroit, another blizzard.
Yeah, the snowstorms.
True. And then DeMar Hamlin, which was already, that game was part of why that story took off, I think, is that game was the game of the NFL regular season. One team on a 6-game win streak, one on a 7 for number 1 seed in the AFC up for grabs. One team that lost the Super Bowl last year, the other one that thinks that should have been there. The first meeting of Joe Burrow and Josh Allen. I mean, we joked on the hit that week, like, how do you build this thing any higher than it is? And, and again, put it on a Monday night. And, the event itself obviously was unprecedented, but it happened on as big a stage as you can get in the regular season.
This brings us into the playoff. If that was the game, this feels like the marquee matchup. Break it down for us. Battle of quarterbacks, battle of two elite franchises, a compelling matchup. How do you see this weekend shaping up?
Well, I mean, I don't want to just default to the obvious, but in this case, I think, even if you think about it, this is where you go. It is an incredible matchup of quarterbacks, right? Two guys that are still very early in their careers. Both have had some playoff success. They are, in any conversation, I think, about the top 3 or 4 quarterbacks of this generation. You've got Aaron Rodgers kind of, in his late 30s, who's kind of in a different category. But when you look at this generation of quarterbacks, these guys are in the conversation about being the very best. Yet they're different, right? Like Cincinnati is a timing offense with 3 elite receivers. They throw the ball to their running backs, and it's Joe Burrow's arm, right? It's his instincts, his vision, and his arm. That's that offense. And yeah, he's tough to sack because he's really good against the blitz. He's obviously deadly accurate, has tremendous playmaking instincts. The one thing they don't do that well is run the football. Mm-hmm. And that's they say they throw to their running backs almost as much as they hand it to them. And Buffalo, you've got an offense that really had a reputation for not running the football very well. And over the course of the season, little by little, that really changed. In fact, they went into the final week of the regular season as the only team in the NFL that had 100 yards rushing every single week. And then you pair that with Josh Allen and his arm. But, Josh is a little more erratic than Joe Burrow is. If I was going to say elite receivers, Cincinnati has 2.5 or 3. Buffalo has 1. That's something we've learned this season. They've got 1 elite receiver. So, yeah, I think they're 2 real high power offense built around the respective skills of their quarterbacks, but they're different. And I just think watching the 2 of them go toe to toe against 2 very good defenses as well. That's the other thing. These are very, very good defenses as well. So you can see a scenario where this game might not be 43-37 because the defenses can keep the score down.
I think too, both quarterbacks kind of had average games last week, Josh Allen and Burrow. So I think kind of like Dak Prescott had a very poor game against the Commanders the last game of the season, then played spectacular against Tampa Bay. I think Josh Allen and Burrow didn't play their best games, but they won. So I think they're going to be at the top of their game. I think that's the game of the weekend. There's 4 great games coming up, but that's the one. Of course, I kind of want Buffalo to win, but I think that's almost a toss-up, that game. It's going to be a very interesting game.
Well, I think the lead into it, as you kind of mentioned, is really interesting that you have, one team has won 9 in a row, one has won 8 in a row. So in one measurement, they're both on a great roll, but they both nearly got upset by a divisional rival starting a backup quarterback, in games where they were heavily favored.
Yes.
And the Bengals win it with a freakish play. They didn't score another point after that. That was it for their scoreboard. And the Bills, have to come from behind in a game that they led 17-0. So I kind of tend, there's an old thing that says that it's always easier to coach, after a loss. And it's because in losses, there are all kinds of things you can work on to correct. Well, those weren't losses, but they were close enough calls at playoff time that I think you can probably get the players' attention about the stuff that needs to be cleaned up.
Yes. And Dave, just one final point on the Buffalo game this weekend. Football, by its definition, features 2 positions where you can't take your eyes off the players. Your eyes are drawn to the quarterbacks.
Yeah.
I love following a sport when you have an athlete in the field that you can't take your eyes off of. Mm-hmm. This game has that exponentially multiplying for both sides of the ball. I'm compelled by this matchup just because I like watching both of these quarterbacks. I enjoy, to Chris's point, I enjoy watching these quarterbacks when they're at their best, playing each other on a playoff stage. It just feels like that sweet spot for a perfect NFL weekend matchup.
Well, you're just watching the best of the very best. Yeah. In their approaching their primes. We don't know what their very best is going to be because I think they're still both getting better. But as somebody who's watched Josh Allen live a lot this year, I don't know how many times I've said to myself, "Wow!" Like when he's running, like throwing on the run. Throwing a dart 60 yards that like you watch, especially where the press box is positioned in Highmark Stadium, you're kind of corner most one end zone. So the one thing that does give you is a really good view to see the ball in flight. And my goodness, like that is, and again, with the accuracy and a lot of it, doing it while he's running, throwing on the run, and that's the part that I marvel at when it comes to him. I mean, he's a physical freak, and when he runs with the ball, it's like it's like an antelope coming down,
hurdling over defenders.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. He's bigger than a lot of the guys who are coming up to hit him. He is a. I don't know that I can think of a player comparable. I mean, there are guys that are have the same 2 skill sets that he does, But when you sort of put the stature in it and the super arm, and the style of running, which is more physical than some guys,
Lamar Jackson can run and he has a great arm too, but he doesn't like run over people. He doesn't have he's not the size of Josh Allen.
Or jump over them, as Josh has been prone to
jump over them. Yes, he's done that a few times. The fans don't like it, but
well, he did really take off with the ball a lot less, particularly in the second half of the season, right? And I think this is just the evolution of him, that they've got to. I mean, everybody sees what happens. These teams are going to the playoffs without their quarterbacks, right? So they need to protect him for the short term, and then I think also the long. And you look at the opening night in LA. I think he ran once in the first half, and we were all like, I guess Josh isn't running as much this year, like we thought. And then the game was tied at halftime. He ran 10 times in the second half, right? It was back to the old Josh. And the old Josh has come out of the bottle, a few times, but he's been gone for a few weeks now. He didn't go last week. They held him to 20 yards.
Hurting his elbow halfway through the season. That'll scare you a little bit too, to make you want to run less. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Want to ask you about Jacksonville and Kansas City. For Paul Hollingsworth to say he's going to be cheering for the Jacksonville Jaguars this weekend is phraseology I never thought I'd say. It's a team that's just not on my radar. Can you explain this team to us? They are fun to watch. They're a compelling story. They have, in the moment, a miniature team, a destiny feel to them. What's happening in Jacksonville?
It's funny. You've got the interesting combination in Cincinnati of Joe Burrow having Jamar Chase, and they were together in college, right? And you've kind of got the same thing in Jacksonville, although the relationship between a quarterback and a running back probably isn't as important as with a receiver, although given the way the NFL uses running backs these days, you throw to them almost as much as you run to them in a lot of instances. But they have Travis Etienne, right, who was with him at Clemson. So it's like, look, I think Trevor Lawrence is one of these guys who is really, if you look at his trajectory, it's not that different, say, than Joe Burrow's. Maybe not that and maybe the Jacksonville Jaguars aren't that different a team than the Cincinnati Bengals are, right? They're a team that's got a lot of holes that probably need to go out and be patched in free agency, like the Bengals did last year with their offensive line, which is now all broken down again. But that I think that's the kind of team that is, and in fact, is catching people by surprise. I mean, I think probably now, after going to the Super Bowl and then going through an off season, we've forgotten how big an upset Cincinnati was, like when they beat Kansas City, right? And that's why, part of the whole Bills torture of losing the 13-second game was, well, and of course we would have beat Cincinnati, right? Like that that even made it saltier, right? Mm-hmm. But the Bengals weren't, as an NFL coach once famously said, who we thought they were. And I think the Jags are kind of that kind of team, right? That is sort of evolving. You see Trevor Lawrence's reliance on Christian Kirk. You saw that a lot last week. But I mean, when you've got young teams, you've got players who can be really hot and then look like they're overwhelmed. And you sometimes, and you saw a team that very much represented that last week in that game, where they're down 27-0 and yet find a way to win.
They've got over the nerves of that first half. That was their first playoff game.
Yeah.
Look how they played in the second half. So they could be scary. Now they have nothing to lose. Sometimes people like getting a bye, but sometimes a bye, which Kansas City has, doesn't always benefit the team. So they've been off for 2 weeks. So that'll be a good game too.
Well, I think Kansas City's kind of the other way, right? Like, and I was saying, we sort of have this idea of what Jacksonville is stuck in our head, right? We kind of have the Kansas City idea stuck in our head, right? Because like they played Jacksonville, or they played like Houston into overtime, right?
Yeah.
I mean, look at Kansas City had a dominant record, but they did not dominate games this year. So when you look at the record and say, well, of course they're going to take playoff rookie Jacksonville out. Well, wait a second. What was happening during the regular season? Was Kansas City blowing people out, or were they close every single week? And they were, more often than not, and sometimes in jeopardy in the second half. So I think this game is probably closer than the public perceives, just because of the entrenched ideas that we have about what the Kansas City Chiefs are and what the Jacksonville Jaguars are.
And looking back just a few days, I can tell you, morning of game day, I said to Chris Flynn on text that Dak Prescott was going to be an interception machine. He wasn't. I said to Chris that Tom Brady was going to be impressive on the big stage and punch the ticket to the next round for Tampa Bay. He wasn't. What do you make of that game? If you can answer this question, what happens next with Tom Brady? Do we have any idea what that game means for Tom Brady going forward?
That just looked like an old-fashioned whooping. It looked like they just ground them, like they hung with them for a while, but you had a feeling kind of like when Dallas scored that first touchdown and the style of the way the game was going, it was like they were the more physical team. They were willing to pay a higher price, and they were just going to kind of give them a beating. And they're a team that we always wait to kind of self-destruct, right? Like as a football matchup, I think that was probably pretty easy to say that Dallas was the better team than Tampa Bay, right? But I think, again, that game kind of got handicapped in people's minds because, well, Tom Brady will always find a way because he always does. And we have this other group of guys who always find a way the other way. Right? Like
plus they played so poorly against Washington.
Right.
That actually, like the coach said, that actually helped them a bit because they got their butt kicked the week before.
Sure.
So Dallas was really out to prove themselves. It didn't help Tampa Bay throwing that red zone interception at the very beginning of the game. I think he was maybe trying to throw that away when he got intercepted. That did not help.
Let me turn this to the former quarterback and let me play host for a second, Chris. One of the things that really jumped up in Tom Brady this year was the interceptions. Like I can't remember what he finished with, but I think it's about a dozen or something, right? And that's the stat that really spiked for him. Mm-hmm. What would that tell you about him, or what might you have seen and you watched him this year? Is there anything that you saw him that made him a little more prone to that maybe he's been, throughout his career?
Well, I think part of it was the play calling. Like I think he led the league in passing. Did he throw 66 passes the other night too? Like the best type of offense for any quarterback, but especially for him, is play action pass. You got a great running game going. Yeah. He's a great play action passer, but they were down all the time. They couldn't run the ball. So that was not his type of offense at all. And then, Byron Leftwich got fired. Was it today?
Yeah. Today.
And he won a Super Bowl 2 years ago. He was interviewing for head coaching positions. So it's funny how things have changed. But I just think the interceptions were because they were throwing all the time. And, they had no running game, no play action game. And in fact, Dak had a great game, and the play action was working well for him the other night too. And, running the football. So, by the way, I think Dallas might even continue, and that'll be my upset pick. I might be wrong, but I'm going to pick them to upset the 49ers. No one's really picking that, but that's my upset pick for the weekend.
I'm just not convinced that Dallas beat a team that's worthy of. I think that may have been more Tampa Bay losing than Dallas winning. That's my sense about that one.
I had those same thoughts watching that game. I thought Tampa Bay would overwhelm me.
Yeah,
Dave, they underwhelmed everybody tremendously.
Yeah. Like Chris says, they get when they get behind. Not that they had a run game anyway, but then they really become one-dimensional, and it's just like watching Tom Brady trying to play by himself.
Let's pivot to the CFL north of the border, because we're joined. This podcast is co-hosted by a Canadian quarterback. A lot of news this offseason. Nathan Rourke leaves BC. Where are we with Canadian quarterbacks in the CFL? It's something that, I have tracked personally, going back to the times of Chris Flynn. Chart that position out for us if you can. And I guess the foundational aspect of this would be the mindset of the league. Do you see more Canadian quarterbacks in the league performing at an elite level in the near future? Is it possible?
Yeah, I do, because I look at the pipeline, right? Yeah. And I think we've seen something happen to football players in this country in the last, 25 years. And that is the kids at the very top, like I'm talking the top of the pyramid. Those kids are taking on the sport in a much more serious way than I think the best kids did 30 years ago. They're approaching the sport the way our best hockey players approach it, right? And one of the things that that I love as a storyteller is, football is a sport in Canada where it's not like hockey where you just get on the conveyor belt, right? You play Pee-wee and then, Adam and then Pee-wee and then this, and you go to junior. And then if I wanted to help somebody be an elite hockey player from age 5, I could tell them exactly how to do it. And in football, the road is a lot more complicated, and there are a lot more options and just all kinds of ways to do it. And I think what we've seen is a real aggressiveness of kids wanting to get access to the best coaching and the best competition. And that means, in a lot of cases, going to U.S. high schools or going to a school like Football North, which is 10 minutes from me here in Mississauga, where they play a U.S. schedule. The kid who's the backup to Curtis Rourke at Ohio is a kid named Caleb Wither, who's from Kitchener. He spent a year or two at Football North. He went to school in Buffalo. The pandemic ended that, so he came back and finished at Football North. He worked under Larry Justanis, who, Chris, I assume you know.
Yeah.
And so Larry Justanis with that program. I mean, the only U Sport quarterback in history who was ever invited to the NFL Combine. Started games in the CFL, and you're getting him coaching you in a program that's playing a competitive U.S. schedule, right, with the best kids in the province and in some cases the country gravitating to your program. So obviously that's a different kind of launching place than we had 30 years ago. And you look at so many of these kids, like the kid who's transferring out of Penn State right now, Christian Veilleux, went to high school in the U.S., right? Grew up in Ottawa, went to high school in the U.S. Nathan Rourke finished his high school in Alabama, and these kids want to get into the same cycle. So, and even kids that have stayed in Canada, like Trey Ford. I mean, Trey Ford I've never seen a U Sport quarterback quite like him. He has skills that you don't see very often, in that league at that level. So I think there's lots of guys in the pipeline. And look, I have unapologetically, I don't know, Chris may completely disagree with me on this, but I have unapologetically never believed there was anything blocking Canadian quarterbacks if they were good enough from playing in the CFL.
I agree with you, actually. And I'll say when I played, there was maybe 10 good quarterbacks in the country playing on the 25 university teams.
Right.
But now every university in Canada has a pretty good quarterback and good sized quarterbacks in the league. Like, I've been impressed with with the U Sport caliber of quarterbacks today. And there was a couple of, Mason Nias, I'm not sure if he's going to get a tryout. I saw an article on him the other day. Saskatchewan took him off their list. And then there's Michael O'Connor too. And there's a few guys, and there's a few names you just mentioned I didn't even know about that are up and comers. So you'll see a few more Canadian quarterbacks in the league, I think, pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, Ohio University going from Nathan Rourke to Curtis Rourke,
essentially
to Caleb Wither, like people,
3 Canadians in a row.
What's going on in Athens, Ohio?
Yes.
No, it's and I was in Ottawa when Jesse Palmer, came out in '97, right, and came out of that Myers Riders program, and his dad, of course, was a former player, and he'd gone to a lot of the camps, and competed against the best kids in the U.S. But look, I think the Nathan Rourke and the other kids that are doing this. Even Brandon Bridge, who played a Division I, this was a 1AA school, FCS school at South Alabama, but started games in the CFL. So you can see it can be done. I see nothing that tells me the teams won't embrace or endorse a guy because he's Canadian. If there is a bias, there may still be one with regard to U Sport, and you can decide whether it's a bias. But I think there are still coaches and GMs in the CFL that think the transition, the speed of the game from U Sport to the CFL is a lot. And it's going to take an exceptional guy to be able to develop quickly enough to make it worth their while making that jump. That bias may still exist to some degree. But, again, Michael O'Connor played at U Sport, right? Trey Ford played at U Sport. So we're seeing these guys, get their opportunities in ways that, and I think it's great. I think it's tremendous. And I think we're going to see continually more. We're going to see more elite football players coming out of this country. And among those will be quarterbacks.
And let's stay in the CFL as we wrap up. Randy Ambrosie, of course, Dave, you and I talked about this last week on TV together. He floated the idea of a pop-up stadium, a temporary modular stadium in the Maritimes to get a football team, we assume, in Halifax. You have rightly pointed out that there needs to be a champion here to get this off the ground. It can't just be a stadium conversation. Look, this won't surprise you to know that the CFL and Halifax conversation is almost starting to exhaust me because it goes back to 1983 and J.I. Albrecht and the Atlantic Schooners. It hasn't advanced really one iota over those years. It's moved back and forth a little bit. We're basically where we are. So let me ask you, where are we on this? Is it a pipe dream? Is it realistic? Is the ground vibrating in any way?
I think you have a very willing partner in the league, and that hasn't always been true, right? But this is on the league's agenda. But leagues don't, leagues are catalysts to these things. They don't make them happen. right? There was a group of 5 businessmen in Ottawa who wanted to redevelop Lansdowne Park and redo Frank Clair Stadium and turn it into something else. And a football team was going to be key to that. And the league was their partner. But it's those 5 guys that got that done, right? That's what Halifax needs. They need a group of 5 businessmen who come out and say, I have the connections to the political level. I have the connections in this. I'm the money man. I'm the this, whatever. All the characteristics that you would have seen in that Ottawa group. It was a pretty diverse and impressive group. You need something like that, and I remember actually Mark Cohen was the commissioner at the time when they had their news conference, right? And said, here we are, this is what we want to do, and blah, blah. And because I lived in Ottawa for 16 years, a lot of those people were familiar to me just by name because they are, hugely wealthy, successful donors and all this kind of thing. And Mark Cohen said to me, what do you think? What do you think about a news conference? And I said, Mark, if you can't get it done with those 5 guys, then take the key, lock Ottawa, throw it in the St. Lawrence River, because that is a dream assembly of would-be owners and stadium developers. You need that in Halifax. And I think that's, and you guys are out there, and Chris, you know the area well. I think it's a part of the country where it's a lot easier probably to get deals done if the people making the deals or proposing them come from within the community rather than from outside.
100%.
Yeah, that's
100%. And Chris, you can weigh in on this, but it seems, now I don't want people here to think that we don't like people who come from away.
No.
But Chris, in your time here, you must have noticed as well, there's a homespun, homegrown appreciation to this community.
When we were playing during the St. Mary's days, we were like the Halifax Huskies. And, the support, we saw the juniors a few weeks ago, how they supported the juniors as well. So as far as the fans and getting the support, I know I'm not worried about that. It's just getting the right ownership group together. And Paul, maybe you'd have a better idea of without mentioning them today, who those people could be. But I feel like we're getting a little closer.
I do feel like I will agree with you and disagree with you at the same time. I'm not sure we're getting closer, but it's more realistic, substantive dialogue. And Dave, it'll interest you that, through our conversations, it sort of spurred me into doing a bit of market research. Halifax is one of the fastest growing cities in Canada. I believe we have the fastest growing downtown. Coming out of the pandemic, the tourism industry, Touchdown Atlantic,
young demographics, juniors,
very young demographic, a university town, a military town, which brings a younger demographic on as well. So this city does check a lot of boxes that would, more so than it has historically, that would make this market more attractive for that champion or champions to step forward and make it happen. So it's almost, if not now, never, because look, I've been here for 53 years. I love this place. I'm biased. I'm a Haligonian, proud through and through. People who know me know I love this place. But there were times when history wasn't that kind to us. Things are happening here. Good things are happening here. And I think it's fertile ground for this. But it goes to that we need a table full of millionaires to step up and make something happen.
Okay, so I'm going to close this podcast by taking it over because I got one question for you, Paul, and one for you, Chris, and then you guys can end it. But I got a question for each of you. As somebody in the market, obviously, that person throughout this whole process, 30 years, that person has never come forward. There's not somebody sitting with X millions who spends half the year in Florida and half the year in Halifax, who's, got nothing better to do than find a toy and a vision and to leave a legacy, frankly. Like, if you can actually leave a legacy, this is more just a toy. You can actually change a region. Why has that person not just not come forward, that we've never even heard that they've knocked at the league's door?
I would say for 2 reasons. One, it's always been a mesh of government money and private money. And I think there's been a disagreement about how much government money should go into a stadium. And that has halted it during different economic times. And 2, I think the list of people who could do that is short. I think we have deep-pocketed, motivated people in this region who could make it happen. But it's not a long list. We have major companies here that aren't in the business of owning football teams. And until they change that pattern, they're into steel and shipping and other things, but not football teams. You're sort of stuck, and you want that leap of faith. Look, until 1969, Charles Bronfman was known for selling whiskey. All of a sudden, he owned a Major League Baseball team. So things happen. Labatt's Brewery, as we talked about last week, Dave, in 1977 said, hey, let's get in the baseball business. So you never know. Until that happens, you're sort of stuck in this moment and you waiting for one person on a short list of possibilities to take that leap.
Yeah, you need a champion. Okay, my question for Chris, and by the way, Chris, awesome basement or backdrop or whatever that is you've got going there.
Yeah, that's my little basement sports.
Oh,
sports
he's gonna
bar,
love.
yes.
He'll love. Dave, you just made his day. He's so proud
Oh
of
my
that
goodness.
bar.
I have
No,
a
see,
huge
when I
hockey
imagine-
rink out here too, out in the middle of the bay here, out at Long
No
Lake. So
kidding.
yes.
Whereabouts you?
Long Lake in Mayo, Quebec. It's about 15 minutes from Buckingham, where I grew up, and it's
Okay.
about 40 minutes from Ottawa.
Wow,
So it's
wow.
where
Well,
it's cottage country where my mother grew up once upon a time.
unreal. Well, that's a very inviting backdrop. That's awesome. Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, that looks really cool. Okay, so my question for you is another quarterback question. One of the things I'm really intrigued about Nathan Rourke in the National Football League. One of the reasons I'm really intrigued is that in his career, every time he has stepped up a level, there hasn't been this sort of regression before success. It's been instantaneous. It was that way from Canadian high school to American high school to junior college to Division I to the CFL. It's, at no level did he ever have to sort of fail before he succeeded. And so of course now he's taking the ultimate step to the National Football League. Chris Flynn, how do you think he's going to do?
When I saw him play this year, like, he has great feet. He's got a great arm. He has really nice touch. I like even his humility, the way when he's getting interviewed, that's all important too. He says all the right things. He can also run too. A lot of times you've seen Canadian quarterbacks go into the CFL. They could either run or throw, but not both. Because I saw him run a couple of quarterback sneaks this year at the beginning of the season for like 60-yard runs for touchdowns.
He did that
shocked.
in college a lot. Yeah, his college tape is full of those. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you see a lot of quarterbacks on a quarterback sneak. They're almost afraid. They put their head down and they kind of just sneak forward.
Yeah.
He's looking to see where he can go, and he'd slide off the center and run down the end for a touchdown. So I was impressed with, like I said, footwork is important for a quarterback too, having those quick feet. And he's got the quick feet. He's got a great arm. He's got nice touch. He seems to have that mental toughness too. So he seems to have all the attributes that you need to be successful. I just saw the interview there through yourself on TSN there with talking about after he signed, and he has the right attitude too. And he's going for that number 2 spot. And everyone's going, why would he want to go behind Trevor Lawrence? Well, as you know, guys get injured quite regularly these days. So the chance of him, if he gets that second string position, at some point he's going to get a chance to play. And I'll be watching. I'll be rooting for him. I think he can do well. He just needs to get that opportunity. A lot of guys, they spend a couple of years in the NFL, then they never get a chance and they get cut. And then maybe they come back to the CFL. But if he gets a chance, I'm sure he's going to do well.
I think he's going to surprise some people. Won't surprise me. And I feel like he probably has chosen the right path too. A lot of people had the eyebrow raiser on Jacksonville, but I think he's playing the long game here.
Like he said, there was no team that was going to offer him like a real chance at a starting position right off the bat. So he's just looking for that number 2 spot. And then if someone gets hurt, he'll get his chance. So that's the right attitude. And
he's proven he's capable of developing while in a backup role, because he did that with the Lions in 2021. The difference between Nathan Rourke out of college and Nathan Rourke starter last season was significant. And he'd only started 2 games. So what does that tell you? That tells you that he can develop in the meeting room, in the film room, practice field.
It is such an exciting thing to watch him develop and take his talents, to quote LeBron James, south of the border, to borrow from LeBron James. This wraps up this episode of the podcast. It is the Scramble podcast. And Dave, we called it the Scramble because Chris Flynn was known for scrambling. Our friend Steve Patterson came up with the name. We've launched this. We're excited about it. And our listenership has been very high. So we've had thousands so far. So thank you to the people who are watching. We think we have a good idea here, Dave, and we're trying to grow it the right way. So the fact that you're a good friend, you're a coworker, you're such a good professional, you take time to join us, we're very grateful. It's a lot of fun. And make sure you come back and see us again sometime soon, please.
I'm happy to do it again, guys. Always got time to talk football, especially with you guys.
We really, really appreciate it. It is the Scramble podcast. We thank Dave Naylor for joining us. For Chris Flynn, I am Paul Hollingsworth. We will see you next time.